Okay, so what is the Gibson Firebird? I feel like a lot of people get this wrong. The most popular thing is that it's like a Strat on steroids, but that could not be further from the truth. It's like a bluesy Telecaster on steroids. It's kind of like a Strat on steroids. The best way that I have ever found to think of the Gibson Firebird, to peg it. You need to peg guitars. You need to kind of know what you're doing with them. You know, for me, if I'm playing on a Gibson SG, I'm going to play differently than I would play on a Gibson ES335, than I would play on a Fender Stratocaster, than I would play on a Les Paul or on a Telecaster, because they each have sort of sonic properties and characteristics and feel and tone that lend themselves to certain licks and don't lend themselves to other licks. You know, and that's not to say you can't play anything on anything. You know, Stevie Ray Vaughan could play his licks on an ES335, or he could play them on a Stratocaster, but the reason he favored the Stratocaster was because that was more the sound for it. You know, the reason B.B. King played on his guitar, and any of them. So the question really is, okay, what is a Firebird? Where does it sit? And there's so many demos of it being played high gain, which, you know, I don't want to knock anyone else for kind of doing music the way that they see fit, but I feel like this is not necessarily a high gain guitar. I mean, if you want to use it for metal, crushing gain is always just a Boss Metal Zone away. But I feel like more of the people who are going to be interested in a Gibson Firebird really more for probably a blues rock or a blues or a classic rock kind of sound, and a little bit less of that more modern, heavier gain sound. So the best way that I have found to describe the Gibson Firebird is that it's like an overpowered Telecaster, but more like a later, like a 60s Telecaster that's kind of bluesy, not really so much the earlier fat, twangy Telecasters, you know, but when the pickups changed, there was kind of a little bit of a mid-range scoop that came with the 60s pickups and the Rosewood fingerboard. You know, the 60s Telecasters are a much different sound than the early 50s Telecasters. So if you were to think of a 60s Telecaster that got hit with some gamma radiation, that had maybe had little kind of steroid juice things going right into the back of its head. Dorian mode has defeated you. That perhaps it's morphin time. So a few of the key differences are you have this neck through body. Okay, so on a classic Firebird, which we'll talk about in a second, this is different with different model Firebirds, but on a classic Firebird, classic reverse Firebird, this is a neck through, which means that this is all right up there, and then these wings are kind of connected on the side. It's this one long piece of wood, and then it has these mini humbuckers, which are different than regular mini humbuckers. All of these make it a much brighter and snappier and twangier guitar, more akin to a Fender sound than a Gibson sound. However, they are, even though they're different than regular mini humbuckers, they are fatter. This guitar will get more aggressive than, Telecaster might. Speaking a little bit about the history of the Gibson Firebird, this is a reverse Firebird, which was the first type of Firebird. Later on, they made one called the non-reverse. So this is the reverse Firebird, even though this was the original Firebird. And the original Firebirds came out with Roman numeral odd numbers. So there was the Firebird I, which had one pickup, no neck binding or no inlays, kind of akin to a Les Paul or SG Junior. You had the Firebird III, which was more like a special. Then it gave you the two pickup, and you had the Firebird V, which is what this is a modern Firebird V. And then the custom equivalent was the Firebird VII, which had an ebony fingerboard with block inlays. It had three pickups. It had the long tailpiece Maestro Vibrola. And that's, again, before you get into the later models like the non-reverse Firebird. And then in modern times, there are things like the Firebird Studio, which is just kind of a one-piece body with humbuckers. And they've made, many different incarnations of the Firebird since then, including the Firebird X, which is... I don't know if it was 10 or not. It's like the iPhone. Like, well, I know we think it's a 10, but it's really not a 10. It's the Firebird X. Yeah, because that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, I digress. So the pickups, so these are not standard mini humbuckers. These are a special breed of humbucking pickups that don't sound as much like a humbucker. A mini humbucker kind of sounds more like a slender humbucker. These sound much twangier, much bouncier than that. And you'll notice there's no pole pieces showing. That's classic of the Firebird pickup. A lot of Firebirds come with different wiring. They come with 300K pots. I actually have 500K pots in here, more of a vintage style wiring. And these are the best Firebird pickups that I've ever played, which are Lust for Tone prototypes, Moonbeams, which is a reference to Eric Clapton's White Room song. These pickups just sound glorious. They really capture the vintage Firebird. You got this bright, punchy, cool, but with girth neck pickup. It's perfect for blues. It's perfect for kind of expressive blues rock. And then the bridge pickup, which has that twanginess and it has that sort of sagginess and really lets you snarl into a note and everything. Some notable Firebird players, probably the two most notable Firebird players arguably, would be early on Eric Clapton and Cream. He used it for White Room and a number of other songs, and it definitely got a different tone. If you listen to those early Clapton recordings, particularly on White Room, there's a really different sound that was associated with the Firebird. And because these are kind of lower gain than regular humbucking pickups, there was actually this is sort of a neat thing that also kind of goes to show how gear can affect your playing. But when Clapton was on a show, and the name of it escapes me now, but he was playing a Firebird into his Marshall stack to a studio audience, and he could not turn it up because, you'd blow the walls off the place and everything. It's not like he had a tube screamer or a power attenuator back then and everything. It was, if he wanted that sound, he had to just blast his amp. So he wound up playing Sunshine of Your Love on a Firebird clean. And it was very different, and I think part of it was because he couldn't get that thick, saturated sound like he got on his SG or 335 to a huge, audience or in the studio when he could really turn it up. And so he actually kind of played it like this. He sort of doubled up on the walk down. And then when you listen to the solo, he almost does these like Chuck Berry double stops and things. And again, because he didn't have gain to work with. It was like plugging a Firebird into ultimately a pretty clean Marshall amp. It just changes the whole dynamics of the song. The other and arguably most famous Firebird player would be Johnny Winter, and he was just a fabulous blues player, great for slide. And again, that also brings up my next point, that Firebird is an excellent guitar for slide if you want to use it for slide. One quick tone tip for your Gibson Firebird is be very good friends with your bridge pickup tone knob, because that front pickup Okay, wait a second. Other people call this the front pickup. This makes more sense to be called the back pickup. Anyone else have that problem? This should be the front pickup. This is your lead pickup. This is your, it's in the front, it's trebly, it's punchy. This is your back pickup. It's in the bass, it's cool, it's kind of laid back. Why do people call this the front pickup? That makes no sense at all. On your treble pickup, you want to be friends with the tone knob because it can get very bright, particularly at higher volumes and kind of in a not good way. It can be a little bit too sharp. It can be a little too strident, is a word that I've heard used, courtesy of Joe Bonamassa. He said that can be too strident. The neck pickup is kind of perfect just as is. It's gets this really cool, woody, bluesy, even jazzy tone that's really, really nice, but again, still has more thickness and warmth to it than a single coil would, but with that really, really sharp top end that just sounds great. This one can really snarl and it can really sound fat. Again, you just want to, you want to be aware of your setup and be ready to roll back on this bridge pickup tone knob. I had a different set of pickups in here for a while, and that bridge one was, was a little thinner, like you will find on a lot of Firebird pickups. And I played live once with the tone knob rolled all the way off to about 3.5, just to get it to sound standard. So now I have not had to do that with the Less for Tone pickup. I think this one sounds great, and actually for the majority of this video shot it with the tone rolled all the way up, except for some parts I rolled it back to about 7 still, and it is just the nature of the beast. But the cool thing about that is you can also get a lot more top end and twang than you could from a traditional humbucker. So I'm curious, what do you all think of a Firebird? How would you describe it? Where do you think it sort of sits in the sonic realm of guitars? I would love for you to leave some comments and let me know what you've always felt about it, for those of you who are players, or if you're somebody who's interested in a Firebird and you haven't been able to quite peg it and you want one but you're not sure if it'll fit. I hope that this video has been helpful in kind of giving you an idea of what you're getting into. They're super, super cool guitars. I think they're one of the most underrated guitars in guitar history. I mean, this is one of the coolest, it's got that retro, old car kind of feel to it, with the sort of pseudo Strat headstock, and the shape is kind of like it's flying through space. It's very, very hot rod. I love these guitars. As much as I love Les Pauls and SGs and things, they're also really cool to see because so few players play them out that, when you go out, you get a different tone, you get a really cool look. I love Firebirds. I can't say enough good things about them, but again, this is another guitar you want to know what it is. You want to know what you're kind of getting into when you get one. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
You